We have independently and collectively been having conversations for some of us, Margaret and I for years, Ed and I more recently, just about the role of social justice and the role of advocacy and the role of building change, and can it actually be done within a city department, within a city agency, and what does that look like? I actually love to share with people that I started my career as a kindergarten teacher and evolved into doing community work, and then had the great opportunity to work for Jeff Adachi, who was the public defender, and was able to lead programs on behalf of Jeff. And I remember Jeff used to always say he was trying to put himself out of a job. He wanted to do enough work in community that a public defender wouldn't be needed. And I bought into that, truly, and had the great opportunity to develop Mo Magic and to do work that was that ultimately, when Margaret went to work at the Department of Children, Youth, and their families, she developed this convener model that was like, how do we actually, I see Tracy, how do we actually get people to work together instead of to be in competition? How do we create a program that has people understand what everyone is doing so that we don't have 20 basketball programs but no art programs? And how do we talk about the resources that are needed on this block versus this block? And when I first started the Magic program in the Western Addition, it had been one of the most violent summers in the Western Addition. I see Tammy in the audience, and we had so many homicides, we had so many young people that were victims of violence, and it was like, what are we gonna do to actually address this? And we can't have adults fighting with each other if we're gonna try and have the kids stop. And that was the beginning of like, how are we gonna be creative? How are we gonna be innovative? How are we gonna create something that is responsive to community need? And from that work, I was able to do work at the Ella Hill Hutch Community Center, and then I ended up at the Human Rights Commission. And someone said to me that department was probably run more like a nonprofit than most nonprofits. Mm-hmm. That the focus, and I still believe this today, that the Human Rights Commission should be very much focused on people, and that it should be focused on humanity and doing what's right for folks. And the minute that it stops doing that, then it should change its name from the Human Rights Commission.
That part.
And so that philosophy, that theology, that ideology is not always welcome in bureaucratic systems. And so we were like, well, what does that look like? And I had a wonderful conversation with Margaret and Ed, and they were like, you know, everybody should not work in a bureaucracy, because a bureaucracy says that this is the way that it has to work. And if you want to challenge the bureaucracy, you probably shouldn't work in it. And I was like, I take that. Margaret, on the other hand, was not sure that she agreed with that. And so I wanted to start with Margaret, and I'm going to have each of our panelists, Dr. Saida Leotutufu Birch, Margaret Brodkin, Ed Harrington, each introduce themselves and share a little bit about the work and the idea and the challenge of can we have innovation and creativity in a bureaucracy? Can a department do that? And I want to start with Margaret, but I want to first and foremost thank Michelle Miao. I want to thank MMS and the sponsors and the folks that made it possible for us to be here tonight. So can we just give them a round? Michelle, unfortunately, is under the weather and not able to be with us tonight. Similarly, I want to acknowledge and recognize the folks in Southern California who are dealing with the wildfires. Ariva Martin, who was going to be with us tonight, was told to evacuate today, so she is not able to be with us tonight. And so we just want to honor and recognize that so many folks are struggling to keep their houses and their bodies safe. And so just want to recognize and hold them in our thoughts. And so as we are having this conversation tonight, it really is about like, how do we create spaces, or can we create spaces within city government? With that, Margaret, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I'm obsessed with this question. When the first report I wrote to Gavin Newsom, who hired me to run the Department of Children, Youth, and Their Families, I wrote, I strive to make DCYF, the agency, an exciting hub of collaborative problem solving and innovation. I believe we are not just a city department, we are an engine for social change. He loved it at the time. So my vision, after 26 years running Coleman Advocates for Children, the major child advocacy organization of the city, leading the charge to create the department, leading the charge to create the Children's Fund, which funded the department, my loyalty was to the vision of what a department should be, to the best use of the fund, to the people who are doing the work in the community, to, of course, the parents and the youth. And I wanted to change the meaning of bureaucracy. I wanted to bring the community into the department, and I saw our mandate as a citywide mandate to work on what's best for kids. So I was there for 5 years. I was able to lead the department in doing absolutely amazing things. I just read a memo I wrote to Gavin. I go like, I can't believe we did all that. And we had high morale. People felt they were part of something important. There are a couple people here who are participating in that. And we did everything we did without any new staff, but reorganizing. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that we did, and then I am prepared during the discussion to say, okay, here's what the pushback was, and here's what the challenges were, and here are some recommendations about what we need to do. So during my tenure, we started 11, this was 5 years, we started 11 new initiatives. We had After School for All, we had early literacy, we had special needs. These were all new initiatives that were done with community. We had the community conveners, the anchor institutions, because I thought every community should have an anchor institution. We created a whole new relationship to the school district, the first MOU between the district and the city. I was the first person able to convene all the department heads with the superintendent. That had never happened before, and fund all these school-based services. I felt we were building a field. We created a Roots Fellowship for agencies that needed more support in providing services. We had biannual conferences with 1,500 people coming and saying, we're a field, we're trying to do this together. We had community building events, Family Appreciation Day, Summer Learning Day. We had an events planner, something I think you got into trouble for, because we thought having community building events was so important. Provided free space, didn't tell the controller, for community initiatives like the family support, the beacons, the parent website. We built partnerships with 13 different city departments, providing funding in those departments. Rec Connect, which was partnering a community-based agency with a rec center. I have a list of all the 13 departments if anybody wants to see it. We had regular meetings with all the mid-management people in the departments because that's where the action is, that's where you get things done. And people loved it. You know, it's like how when they learned to, or able to communicate with each other. With the mayor said, I said, we need a citywide policy council for children. Great, let's do it. We had people inside and outside government. We sort of did the first study about families leaving the city. We made recommendations about family housing. And don't tell the Department of Housing, which was not thrilled by that. We brought in young people to review grants, to evaluate programs. We repurposed positions. I thought there were a bunch of positions. This is 35 staff people in the department that should be repurposed into being youth organizers, community organizers, professional development people for community agencies. We hired community leaders like Tracy Brown here, who ran the Community Conveners program. We had 21 community conveners all over the city that coordinated services. I fired all the evaluators because I thought they came up with bogus information. They were saying these agencies are good and these agencies are bad. I go like, I'm from the community. I know you're wrong about that. Brought in 100 CBOs to write their own standards. They were good standards. Some of them have become national, even international standards for the field, and people were devoted to, because they had written them, to the standards that they were going to be judged by. And we reorganized the staff.
And I think, like, all of that, like, give it up for Margaret and the innovative.
I have one more sentence. We reorganized and I integrated teams so that grant makers and planners and evaluators were all in the same team as the child care team and the recreation team. And then after 5 years, and the mayor, like, you are great, I was summoned and I was dismissed. And it was gentle. I got to resign with grace. Well, not so much grace. I didn't have a lot of grace about it. And told it was time for a replacement. And there's a reason for that. And I think that that's what I want to talk about, sort of what's the pushback to doing the kinds of things that we were trying to do in the department that led to, okay, we've had enough of you for 5 years. So,
I mean, I think that anytime you're asked to resign, it's hard. And I think when you're asked to resign and you've been doing work that you think is critical and helpful, it's even harder. And listening to you talk, I did not, I don't know that I necessarily hired event planners, but I came from private school. I had worked in private school. I had gone to $100,000 galas. I had seen the importance of, I remember the first time I took a group of kids to a restaurant, paid for it out of my own pocket, to a restaurant that had linen napkins. And I remember the kids were like, oh my gosh, this is pretty fancy. We were eating burgers, but they were like, they have like, this is like cloth. It was a big deal to them. And then one of the things I know, Dr. Sy, like, we were like, how do we make sure that everybody feels like they belong here in San Francisco? You talk about the Summer Learning Day, and I remember the first time we brought food trucks, and we had kids from public housing and from different neighborhoods, and they had never eaten off of a food truck because they couldn't afford to eat off of a food truck. They couldn't afford what it was, or the fact that we took families to the Warriors game and they were in the nosebleeds, and we paid for these kids who live in San Francisco but who could never afford to be inside the Chase Arena, and that was somehow criminalized. Like, oh my God, how dare you pay for these kids to go to the arena?
Some people remember Family Appreciation Day, where we got every museum, we got every place down at Fisherman's Wharf, et cetera, to let any family with kids from San Francisco to come in free. But it was the same kind of thing, those are community building opportunities that give people the opportunity.
But when people feel seen and valued and a part of something, it changes how they see themselves in the city, but it also changes how they act in the city, right? They're not angry at other folks for having, because so I want to shift over to you, Dr. Sy, share a little bit of whatever it is that you want, but also this idea of like the great work that has been done that people may not know about.
Yeah, well, I will say first, to this day, when I go to a restaurant, I don't use linen napkins because I'm afraid to get them messy. So I always ask for paper napkins. So talk about exposure. And then second, thank you, Dr. Davis, for seeing me and for providing me the opportunity to share. Good evening. My name is Dr. Saida Leatutufu Birch. And in every space, I am unapologetic about being open in my role, in my identity as being a daughter of the city, being a child of God, being a wife, a sister, a cultural orator, an organizer, a disruptor of anti-Black racism and systems rooted in white supremacist ideology, and an advancer of Black liberation and indigenous sovereignty. And I'm going to quote my sister. Teresa Siangatonu, when I say, I was brought to this work with the intention because I recognize that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams and my colonizers' worst nightmare. So this work is not easy, and as somebody, I resonate so much. I've never met Margaret. This is my first time meeting, and I resonate so much with your story because it dawned on me in this moment that it is leaders like her who paved the way for me to implement some of the very same structures. So as she was going through what she accomplished with DCYF, Those very same structures I implemented and accomplished with the Dreamkeeper Initiative. And what brought me to government was I wanted to be that disruptor. And I wanted to be the person who changed from the inside, because I was a beneficiary of the beacons, of the programs, of the DCYF programs, of the free museum days. I watched my mom, who was in the room, navigate the system so brilliantly. And she's the first Black woman leader that I looked up to and that I knew. And so I said, okay, well, how do I make it so that my experience, my mother's experience of becoming a homeowner, my experience of being a former public housing resident turned homeowner, how can I replicate that for the 60,000 cousins, aunties, brothers, grandmas, folks who are in San Francisco that I love and that I care about, because I love this city so dearly? And Dr. Cheryl Davis, I've been with the city for 8 years, started in public housing transformation work. And Dr. Cheryl Davis, we encountered each other at a school program and gave me the opportunity to do something that I'm so passionate about, to exercise creativity and innovation. So if the question is if a department can practice innovation or be a hub for creativity and innovation, the answer is yes. And why is the answer yes? Because it leads to results such as growing home ownership through the city down payment assistance program by 1,000% for non-white homeowners, for buyers of color. It leads to a 97% retention rate in employment within the city and county of San Francisco of folks who finally feel seen and heard in a human resources department that is now structured in a way where it supports diverse talent. It leads to more than 200 students enrolling in post-secondary education, and a number of them already graduating from 4-year universities and colleges. We got to welcome more than 60 students from HBCUs across the country this past summer to experience San Francisco, some of them who have never even seen an ocean. We've experienced results such as exposing folks to new worlds, such as Napa Valley, the restaurants. I myself in this work have visited places in San Francisco that I've been here my entire life. I've never been to Nob Hill. I've never been to the Harbor, the dim sum restaurant that's right down the street next door. And so when I think about notions of worthiness and deservedness, my role as a public servant was committed to offering that to the folks that I identify as my relatives. And I had the opportunity to do that in the 3 years that I served in this role. And the other thing that I would say when it comes to innovation and creativity, and what resonates with me, is that we push too hard, because that creativity, like bureaucracy, is clearly not for me. If you want a bureaucrat, I am not your girl. Maybe a couple of years, like we tried it, and I knew for a minute that our creativity and innovation, particularly that of Black women, like shout out to Black women, I'm very unapologetic about that, is when we're able to push and be creative and innovative, we make waves and move the needle and actually make change. But that's just a little too much for government. So yes, a department can be a hub, but it's not ready for that.
Right, but it's got to change.
It does.
I do not accept that thesis.
Yeah, it does.
I feel like there should be room for people.
Well, I mean, this is where we had the debate with Ed, right, about like what it can be, what it will be. I mean, I will say I probably had no greater pain the last few months in my life than what I've experienced. And I wonder, like, I never want to be one of those people that's like, I don't care that we helped this many hundred people. I would never do this again. Like, I don't want that to be my story. But I also do not want, I remember when I was teaching kindergarten, I used to be like, I would say to people, don't squash the spirit of like the kids, right? When they come in and they think that, you know, they're a unicorn, or they think they're going to grow up and be a unicorn, like that childlike wonder, when we begin to lose that, like I never want to be the person that like is trying to kill someone's spirit. But I will say bureaucracy will kill your spirit. And the hope and the ability, like the things that I have been able, the joy that I've seen people have from being in places that they've never been before, like I never want to let sadness and fear make me not want to experience that joy. And I'm worried that we don't have enough people, right? This is where I do agree with Margaret. I'm worried that we don't have enough people that want to bring joy and make people happy and make the world better in government because it's been like squeezed out of them. But what do you think, Ed?
So, as the resident bureaucrat, I'm the token bureaucrat, I guess, on the panel tonight. I'm Ed Harrington. I was the controller in San Francisco for 17 years. I was also the head of public utilities in San Francisco. I retired a while back. I work a lot with Margaret on funding the next generation, and I do a lot of work with nonprofits, and I do get, I can be the bureaucrat. It's a lot more fun being the advocate in many ways, because you don't have to care about the whole rest of the world. You can care about what you care about. Yes, advocates can be successful, but it certainly isn't easy in a bureaucratic relationship like we have in a place like San Francisco. And I would not ask the advocates to change, I would ask the system to change, because that's the only thing. And if the advocates can bring that change, everybody else can benefit from it. There's the big change that we need, so I'm going to go more towards what the city needs to do differently. Okay. The big change we need is a culture change. I'm not talking about individual rules or practices or processes. Those come because of the culture that we have. And there's three things that I really think are the key. Changing the equation around risk, really having shared common goals, and using our frustration well. So changing the equation around risk, when I became controller, it would have been a perfect day for most of my staff if nothing happened. If no checks were issued, if no contracts were signed because nothing wrong happened. And their goal in life was not to be blamed for something wrong happening. Well, you can imagine when they encounter somebody who wants to do something different and new, it's like it doesn't work. It took me years to convince them that their job was not to stop people from doing things that were wrong, but to help people do things that were right. And the fact that you needed to help people who aren't part of this community of bureaucrats figure out ways to make things happen. There should be more risk in not doing the things the city needs to have done than doing a few things that become problems as you do the work. And so that's the first big thing, is that culture change of changing that risk. And it does take somebody that's willing to say, if we're going to try to do something different, we're going to run into problems. Things will not be simple, and you have to accept that that's part of the goal. And that's a good thing, actually, as you're running through. The second thing is the idea of kind of shared common goals. Margaret had a goal of having children and youth thrive in San Francisco. Cheryl had a goal of raising up the Black community in San Francisco. The mayor may have had some of those goals. The board may have had some of those goals. The whole rest of the city didn't have that goal. No one ever told them it was their goal. So the people you need in finance and purchasing and legal and HR, that is not their goal. Their goal is to follow their rules. If you could actually change that to have them think their goal is to uplift the Black community. Their goal is to have children that thrive. Just imagine how much more you could do with that. And that's just the admin people. What if your program had Muni and PUC and Health and Rec Park all thinking it was their responsibility to be part of this and to make the change that was there? We could do dramatic things. We have 35,000 employees in San Francisco. We have a $15 billion budget. If we put our minds to something, it's amazing what we can do. We rarely, in fact, we never put the collective effort of San Francisco into things that we think are good goals. But you need to have a real sense that these are common, shared things that we all believe in and we all want, and we just don't have that. The third thing is using the frustration. Right now we're getting a lot of discussion with the new mayor and everybody else coming in that, people are frustrated they can't build new housing. They're frustrated they can't open a business. They can't do this. Well, you can imagine how frustrated people inside the city are. And so using that anger, using that frustration to change things, now is the time. You know, you have a new mayor, you have people, and be able to say, you know, I remember the mayor was hiring somebody for an important job a few years ago. And I was like, this structure is, it was hiring people in the city. This structure is crazy. It takes 2 years to hire somebody. And this person's going to take this step that takes 6 weeks and make it take only 3 weeks. And I thought, well, that's good. What if you hired people who said, why do we have that step? Why does it even exist? If you did this thing differently, could you just skip it completely? I mean, I remember when I was the controller and I was in a meeting with people and it was, the nonprofits were complaining about their ability to get paid by San Francisco, to get a contract and get paid. And they were doing our work for us. And so I brought them in, I brought the contract people in. I'm like, what's wrong? What doesn't work? And I remember they all said, well, there's this one rule that makes us all crazy. And I said, well, then who made that rule? And they said, it's the controller's rule. And I said, well, I'm the controller, and I don't need the rule anymore. And they were like, what? Is that possible? Could you actually say, don't do this anymore? It's like, yeah. If it's the controller's rule, I will check with my staff, make sure I'm not missing something here. But it seems stupid to me to do that, too, so just stop doing it. They had never encountered anyone who could say you don't need to do that anymore, or that rule doesn't make sense. So it's time to use the frustration to talk to people and say, that doesn't work for us anymore. You know, and it's not easy. It takes leadership. It takes courage. Those are in short supply. But to be able to have people who say, I want this done. It is our goal as the city to have this happen. I will stand behind you when things go wrong because they will, and I will support you in that. That's not rocket science. That's just leadership and courage, and that's what we need.
Thank you. I applaud that. I know, Dr. Sy, you wanted to...
Yeah, because there are a couple of things, Ed, that you mentioned that I want to respond to. When I entered the role, or when I accepted the role as the director of the Dreamkeeper Initiative, what I knew is that it would come under constant attack. And I was very clear that if the city served Black folks how it was supposed to, the Dreamkeeper Initiative would not need to exist. And so there are two things that you mentioned that I want to highlight on my journey that I've learned the last 3 years: risks and rules.
Yep.
The city takes risks every day. So every dollar that they put into law enforcement, you're risking Black and brown bodies. You're risking more people being incarcerated. Every dollar that's shifted from mental health, we saw during COVID, everything was possible. That's when I knew that this city can be creative and innovative. And so when we talk about risks, what I learned in this last 3 years, it only wasn't worth the risk, and I wouldn't even call it a risk, but if we're using that language, it wasn't worth the risk when it came to investing in Black folks and brown folks in their prosperity and being intentional about that and being a city that serves all, but really only some. And then when we talk about rules, I didn't learn so many new rules until Dreamkeeper Initiative. Like when we think about a lot of the policies and procedures, and I'm so glad that you mentioned you were a controller that's like, what is this rule? We don't need this anymore. Because we would speak to the office and say, okay, well, can you give us the policy? We don't have a policy. Okay, well, let's create one. And so when we don't have the proper infrastructure, when there isn't an existing model or those existing rules and the city is making up rules as we go, that makes it very hard to be creative and innovative, and it exacerbates the rhetoric around mismanagement, because as far as I'm concerned, the entire city is mismanaged.
Well, let's see, when did I leave? 2009. It makes me sad every time I think about it. It actually surprised me, which it shouldn't have. I should have understood. And I learned things subsequently that, so when I was having meetings that people were so excited about with other departments, and we were planning what can the libraries do with the health department, and I found out later, like 2 years later, a former DCYF staff person said to me, you know, every city department had hated you for that. I did not appreciate the extent to which departments protect their turf. They're competitive. Nobody wants to sort of, if we're going to collaborate, if we're going to have a common vision, it has to come from the mayor. It has to come from a ongoing communication and structures that allow that to happen. And we didn't have any. So we created this wonderful, remember Rec Connect, where we paired a CBO with a rec center because I thought the rec centers could use some improvement, but that there was a really rich marriage. The union had a fit about it. And I was left on my own. I went to the mayor and said, help me out. You've said this is a great idea. You've endorsed it. We did an evaluation of it. These are all the wonderful things that happen. Work it out with the department head. So it requires a mayor or a structure within the mayor's office that allows you to do the kind of collaboration that you...
But I mean, I would say, to add to that, I mean, I agree, but I think that there's also a piece of this, and I don't know that that's in the mayor's office and like what that structure is, like whether it's other people at other levels, but the shared common goals, like we have them, but we don't have the shared language, right? Like, so if I'm saying that investing in recreation programs is actually a public safety strategy, but I have to explain that to you, right? Like I think we're all in our silos and we're actually all probably moving to some degree to the same place, but we don't put the value on the same thing, right? Like because my experience is, again, spending years in education in different arenas and different places, there are some things that are automatic in more affluent neighborhoods that we begrudge and actually say it's not, the other groups of people are not worth having, right? But that if we actually put that same type of investment up to every young person, regardless of their economic status, we would actually need less people arresting students in school. Right? But that we don't have the same shared language or the shared values, right? Like we think if you can afford it, then you can have that, but we don't realize that sometimes I can't afford the thing that I need to make sure that everybody is safe.
And we don't have the mechanisms for communication about it. I feel like there's no forum. You know, maybe there's a department head meeting once every whatever. I remember going to a department head meeting and I was put on the list. We were talking about public safety and I'm like, well, why are there so many kids in the juvenile hall? And, when actually arrests are going down. You'd think I'd asked, an insane question. People remember to this day, remember when you asked that question? I mean, we don't have ways, our forums for communicating what our values are and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish just don't exist. And I keep going back to the mayor. It's not always the mayor's fault, but, well, yes.
It's a big part.
Well,
But
I mean,
it's a big part.
if we're gonna, because I want to make sure we have a few minutes for public comment, but I think, what are some of the solutions, right? Like, is it possible, right? Like, definitely folks who, maybe everybody doesn't need to be a bureaucrat, but I do think that you need to have innovative, creative people working on the inside, and maybe folks who are less inclined to be like, where's the line? And maybe they don't play all the way up to the line. Maybe they're willing to, but like, what are the solutions? What do we need to do? Because we are, I'm always hopeful, right? But I will say probably for the first time in my life, I'm not as hopeful as I used to be, right? That I have, I've never had much hope in the system, but the system is made up of people, and I'm having less hope in people.
Yeah.
But just to add to that question, I mean, why is it so hard to change somebody's job description? You walk into a department and you see 4 people, you think, gee, I'd rather have a youth organizer. I'd rather have a parent outreach person. Why is it so hard to give space to community? You didn't ask them to pay. Why? It's always a fight with the unions. Sorry. Why is it so hard to change the structure of things? I feel like I want to go to the controller. I want to go to and have them say, yeah, I'm going to help you figure out how to do it, instead of saying, you can't do that. And it's very specific. There's a lot of very specific things.
Not that you have to
require
solve it all,
flexibility.
Ed. I just,
No, but I really do believe it starts with the mayor, and it starts with the, I have been hopeful that this current mayor has put in some people that are supposed to organize departments and have some coordination. If you don't talk to people, how are they ever going to realize what is important to you? And we don't have department head meetings like we used to. We don't have those kind of things. But part of it, too, is that the mayor needs to appoint people that are disruptors and then needs to support them
Right.
when something goes wrong, because it will go wrong. I mean, when I was controller, we had budget problems, whatever. I had to change the staff dramatically. It took a year, but I was able to retrain 50 people, and they disappeared from my department, but they didn't lose their jobs. We cut all the processes for processing things in the city in half, and we were saving $5 million a year. 3 years later, we had an embezzlement at juvenile probation. And people were calling for my resignation because how'd you let this happen? And it's like, we stopped doing some things that we didn't think were important to do up front. We didn't pre-audit every single piece of paper in the city. We trained people, we let them go, and yeah, it went wrong. And I was the controller, so it was hard to fire me. If I had been department, I would have lost my job.
Yeah.
Didn't matter that I had done all these things to make the world better, that I had saved much, much more money than what was going on there. It went wrong. And you can understand when those kind of things happen, why people are gun shy, and why, unless there is a mayor or somebody really high up saying, I'll protect you, it's really tough to step out. So that's why I kind of do say it has to start with the mayor saying, I believe in this enough, and I'm announcing right now something's going to go wrong, and it's going to be okay. And people don't do that well in politics. People don't do that well in government agencies. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have any controls at all. It's taxpayer money. We should spend it wisely. It doesn't mean we should spend it with rules that were made up because somebody made a mistake in 1953, and so they made a rule about that, and somebody else made a mistake in 1982, and they added that rule, and the next rule, and the next rule, and nobody went back and said, but do these add up to something that's useful? Having to take 2 years to hire somebody is not useful. And we're working hard to get down to a year and 3 months. Are you kidding me? And so it needs such a dramatic change, but that only really comes from the mayor, I think,
I agree.
walking in and saying, we're gonna do this differently, and when it goes wrong, I'll be okay with that.
right. I mean,
Have you ever?
Took accountability.
Yeah.
right,
Have you
I
ever
mean,
tried to?
I want to add to that, or maybe ask again broadly, because I think I hear that and I understand that, and maybe mine is more because it's election season, it's all these things, but I think the pile on, the like not even sticking to the rules that you have, like my failure to disclose or what, like there's not even a penalty for that, right? Like, but yet to be demonized and to have all of these things happen, and that no one, whether it's the community that you supported or it's the board of supervisors or it's everyone is so afraid and gun shy because no one wants to be the next person whose name is in the front page, and that we don't have a conversation about like what actually I mean, I know we talked about, I was like, can I call for a hearing? Can we do something? Like there is a fear of like actually owning that things aren't as bad as people said, but that we just run with that, and it's like, let's just erase this, let's change the name, let's get rid of the program, let's do all of these things, which actually takes us backwards.
Right.
Instead of actually trying to focus on what do we learn from that. I was talking to someone today that says, can we just pause for a minute and understand what went wrong and learn from it and build a better version of this versus erasing it all and demonizing everyone?
So I would say the three things that are coming up for me. One is public servant. So remove bureaucrat. If I, as a public servant, if the public is disclosing to me that they want to be served in a particular way, that deserves to be honored and respected. And so in my role and how we serve the public that we did, that's because they asked to be served that way, and we honored that. The second is, I'm losing my train of thought. The second is related to innovation in rules, and it's trying to come back to me. Okay.
It'll come
come back to me.
It'll come back.
Yeah, it will.
Have you ever tried to hire a youth? in a city. Fix that. It's like.
Well, I mean, I would say youth, our undocumented, our folks who are, I just think that there are all these things where we say we want to make things better and that we want to work with folks formerly incarcerated. I mean, it blows my mind that we are progressive and we are restorative justice and we are about how to support people and give people second chances until they do something wrong. And then it's like, no, we don't really mean to give you a second chance.
And I got it back. So you reminded me, because when it comes to other communities, the freedom to fail, when we think about, and we talk about it all the time, venture capitalists, wealthier communities, this idea of a gap year, or yes, you continue to fail forward. We don't have that opportunity. Right. And the other thing tethered to that is narrative. And who controls the narrative. So the minute a mistake is made, it blows up in the media and the story is skewed and we can't control that. And then the last thing that I wanted to say, I love when people say taxpayer dollars are being used. I've been a taxpayer in the city for a very long time. And so if I had the choice of where my taxpayer dollars go, they would go to people having access to quality food, which is what we did. They would go to people having the supplies that they need for school, which is what we invested in. They would go to reimbursing these organizations who put out millions and millions of dollars and are still waiting to be paid back by the city. We don't even talk about those systems because the city is so quick to cut your funding, but they sit on the millions of dollars that they owe you, expecting you to be able to handle a crappy reimbursement system. Like, that's where I want my taxpayers to go to. And so if we're talking about, like, what does it mean when San Franciscans are serving San Franciscans in the way that San Franciscans want to be served, but we get punished for it?
And there's now a crusade that is coming upon us to go after nonprofit agencies and the city's contracts with nonprofit agencies. And I think many times about what we tried to do. It's like, we knew certain agencies had problems. We knew there were directors who were great organizers but couldn't write a grant or fill out something and so we could have defunded them all. Instead, we created a fellowship for all of them, actually gave them some money to participate and awards for participating. Okay, here's the things you need to learn. And saw that as a function of the city.
But I think we talk about building capacity. I think we've talked about, and I know over the years there have been these like shared back office and thinking about like all of these things. And I think part of this for me is the hard conversations, right? Like, just like we've talked about, maybe everybody doesn't need to work for city government. Everybody maybe doesn't need to be a director, but they have a relationship on the ground and community that is valuable, right? And I also want us to acknowledge and own that we ask nonprofits to jump through a lot of hoops. We put a lot of responsibilities on them, and then we get upset when they pay their staff equivalent to what the city pays. That we are, like, we think that someone should work and live in San Francisco for $37,000 a year and get upset when they move to $100,000 a year. And meanwhile, many people that work in city government are making well over $100,000 a year entry level. And that we are not having really honest conversations about what it is that we're asking people who are typically not working a 9 to 5. They are working 12 hours a day, spending their own money out of their own pockets, and that we haven't built a system that respects that. So I think part of this is, I don't know what that looks like. But I think having honest conversations where people feel comfortable to come and say, this is what it really takes, and understanding that when we invest properly, it actually saves us money on the back end, right? We talk about incarceration costing us. I know Julie's done these numbers and looked at this. Like, it costs us way more to incarcerate a young person than it does to educate a young person. But that we would say, don't spend $20,000 paying for a young person to go to college, but we would spend $50,000 to put them in juvenile hall. So that is when we talk about innovation, and we don't really do, and I don't know if you've seen a lot of this, we do audits and things, but we don't really do a cost-benefit analysis to say, this is how much money we saved by making this investment.
Yes, and you're right. And part of it is that's hard to do.
Yeah.
And we're too lazy to do it. And part of it takes a long time to do. You know, when we're going out and talking about adding children's services in a variety of communities, people will say, well, how can we guarantee? And it's like, well, guarantee. The idea is if you can do early childhood education, hopefully you'll have an adult that can thrive. Do you want me to test that for you? Do you have any? I mean, it's been done. We know it. You can link all that someplace else, so don't give me that stuff. You know that if you put money here, it's going to make a difference there. And I'm not going to sit here and try to prove that to you for the next 20 years before you give me any money. And that's the same thing that we can encounter in a lot of places. We're like, we know it's cheaper to do that, but it's harder. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually a believer in unions in many ways, but frankly, the POA is more important than you are. Mm-hmm. You know, and when it comes down to that, in terms of an endorsement for mayor or something else, and they will define public safety. And the more you say, mental health, isn't that public safety? All these things, aren't they public safety? Why do I feel unsafe? It's not because I don't see a police officer every half block. It's because of what I see on the streets and the people that are hurting out there. It's hard to make that point to people, and it doesn't always work. And it rarely works.
In many ways, that's why it needs to change now. So if I'm just thinking about the HRC and its establishment, the city services system has been in place for 60 plus years. And so if we don't address it now and get innovative, we'll be in the same place we are today the next 60 years. So the idea of time and it being too hard and taking too long is relative when we've done the same thing over and over and over again and have expected different results, but they haven't come.
But there has to be different hiring practices. I felt like I was kind of alone, and I know you felt the same way. And you learn to protect yourself when you run a city department. You learn to resent the people who are sort of out there, you know, doing different kinds of things. And we need to recruit different kinds of people to run our departments. I could start in now on who I would like to.
But if it takes a year and a half to get a job, who's going to wait around for that?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and there are people who've had those jobs forever, and there's very little creativity and innovation, and they resent someone like me, you know, who comes in and says, I have these great ideas, let's do it this way, and, you know, and then the mayor ducks, and you go like, ooh. I did learn also how important it was that there's sort of this coterie around a mayor. You know, the yes people, the who, you know, they protect the mayor, but they also resent people who are trying to do something different. Yep. I got called in once. We had these fabulous conferences, you know, with 1,500 people going to Moscone Center with, you know, talking about what the future of kids is going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And the mayor's office was furious at me, like, we should have been in charge of the publicity for that. How dare you go and talk to the press about what should be happening for kids, blah, 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 blah. So we need to be more expansive about who becomes part of the bureaucracy.
I know we're coming up on time, but the last thing that I want to say, because you reminded me the language, and you talked about shared language and what we value. So when it comes to new hiring practices, if we value a degree in, I don't know, planning more than we value the person who grew up in the neighborhood and helped share it, then we're going to end up in the same place. If we, when we talk about data and how we measure outcomes and impact, the city is great at counting widgets, but not great at counting intangible or non-material success. So if a young person tells me that their ability to go to a college tour inspired them to not go pull out a gun literally or save their life literally because they got shot at the day before, then I'm going to send you on that college tour. We are going to invest every single penny for you to go on that college tour. And now you're enrolled in college as a junior, about to get your degree. And so, yes, like the cost benefit analysis that you're talking about. And so I think in terms of a solution, there's a misalignment between, at least in my role, what community values as data and what the city is not set up to collect as data or doesn't value.
Right.
And there's no mechanism for accountability. Yeah. I feel like The mayor has no idea what's going on in most city departments most of the time. You'll have to take it upon yourself to actually aggressively, and that's not right. There should be accountability for, is this really responding to needs?
But even accountability, like, is based on, because I think about this, like, some of this stuff, yes, it's hard to measure, but even if we thought about it in terms of, like, what success looks like. And so I've often talked to people about, like, let's say we have 10 people in a program, and it cost us $10,000 per person, right? But so we're spending $100,000 on this 10-person program, and you only have 10% success rate. But the success of that one person actually saves you $100,000 because they're not going to general and they're not incarcerated and they're not but we want the percentage to be 70% or more, and if it's not 70% or more, and so I'm always like, well, if we actually took the one person that was going to shoot somebody or was going to rob somebody or was I'm sure the person that they were going to shoot would have thought that it was a valuable program, right? But I think that we get so bogged down in these percentages and what it looks like and what success looks like, so that when we talk about accountability, it's like, you didn't have a 75% success rate, and so therefore this program is not successful. Right. So 30%, 40%, 50% doesn't matter. Like 50% of 1,000 is still 500 people, but you'll say it wasn't good enough, and so we're going to cut the funding. And now when you've got 500 people who are now homeless or now needing to be incarcerated, so I think the accountability is important, but where it's back to the shared values, shared goals of what success looks like.
Yep.
I just thought of the city bureaucracy and all the directors. It's like a protection racket in a way. It's like everybody if I asked the question, which was an implicit criticism of the chief probation officer about and nobody will forget it. You agree, I'm not going to criticize you, and you're not going to criticize me. And if you kind of go out on a limb, it's implied criticism. Mm-hmm. And it's creepy. What can I say?
Yeah.
It comes from the mayor.
I mean, if we being honest, that made it easy because they was like, oh, we'll just get rid of them two over here, and then, we'll be good and cushy.
Well, again, back to the shared values, but also this idea of how much risk, right? And I think public servants get a bad rap, and I think the system is set up where it's not easy to do your job. Mm-hmm. And so you do, to your point, just kind of everybody's in their cycle. This was supposed. I'm feeling like Ed's the only one that thinks that we can actually have it be a community hub of a hub of innovation. I don't know.
Hope springs eternal.
I do, if we have the right mayor and the right communication set up and the right structures for accountability and for collaboration, so it isn't a competition or just protect your turf kind of thing. And we talk about the innovative things, and we explore how you can change job descriptions and hire youth. And
or maybe that's what public-private partnerships are for. We leverage philanthropy to be flexible. But in my opinion, yes, that, and I don't think we should let government off the hook.
No.
Government is here to serve the public,
right,
and so they should serve us the way that we want to be served.
I think we should go meet with Daniel.
Yeah, let's do it.
A press person called me recently and said, why can't the rest city run like the airport? And I said, well, first of all, the airport's a good place. It runs fine. They have more money than God. They're out of the city. When things go wrong, no one knows.
That's right.
They're never in the press. Their job is actually relatively straightforward. Mm-hmm. So yeah, great that they're doing a good job. Yeah. But let's talk about the real business of being in San Francisco doing things where when you get a hangnail, someone's going to kill you for it. Mm-hmm. So it's a different world that people want sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I just want to thank you all so much for being here tonight. I want to thank the Commonwealth Club and the staff and the tech support and all the folks who are staying here to help us. Another shout out to Michelle and MMS. I think what we were hoping when we said we wanted to have this conversation in this panel is to spark a conversation, to spark some energy, to be able to continue and to not, I've had people say to me, Cheryl, you should just leave San Francisco, right? Like you should just go, right? Like there is no place for this work. And I think what we're hoping to say is that the voices of community, the commitment to like do better doesn't live in any one person, in the mayor, the administration, any of that. It lives with the people. And that part of this is like, how do we begin the next phase of making sure that we do stay creative, that we do stay innovative, and that we do stay a space that is welcoming to all folks, and that we are willing to take the risks, not just in venture capitalism, not just in tech, but in improving the lives of everyday people. Right. So please make sure to speak to us all. Let's share emails. Let's stay connected, but let's also just be really committed to doing more than what we've already been doing. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight.